Hi, I'm Hassan and I'm a recent trainee for a PGCE and QTS course here in the UK. I've just completed it and I wanted to make videos about my journey throughout this whole year, and I wanted my first video to be some interview and application process tips and questions. So a bit about me. I've recently just completed my PGCE and QTS. I did that in secondary art and design, so just focusing on secondary schools and A levels, and my subject specific was art and design. I didn't kind of go through the traditional route because I graduated in architecture in 2020. After I got my master's from the University of Edinburgh, I worked in a design studio for about 2-3 years, and then in 2022 I decided to move to South Korea to just try out international English teaching. It was something very spontaneous because I didn't really know much about South Korea or the country or how the school system works, but there was just something in the back of my head where I felt like I wanted to do something that was adventurous, and I ended up loving it. I had the best time, the best year of my life. I learned so much about culture, about people, about teaching, and I told myself that if I was to come back to the UK, I would want to qualify in a subject that I'm passionate about, and then I would love to go back out and teach internationally. I would love to create a channel where I can share relevant information and helpful tips and guides for everyone else, because I feel like there wasn't enough recent positive things about teaching, and I do think it's such an amazing career. It's definitely hard, but it's one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. So with my application process, I think it was super simple. I applied in quite late actually. I applied in July/August, and the course was starting in September. I basically applied from the government website. I think you can choose 4 to 5 schools and or training providers or universities. I decided to go through the training provider route because I didn't want to go back into that uni sort of lifestyle. Once I had chosen my providers, I basically just applied and had interviews for all of the spaces, and then I only chose one to actually go to. So I declined the other offers and then I chose one training provider, and then I just had my interview. So that was a bit about me. I've got my notebook with some questions that I was asked, and I'm just gonna go and break down each one. First kind of topic we're going to focus on is teaching philosophy or motivation. So I was asked, why do you want to be a teacher? In your answer, you need to make sure you're telling them that you are super motivated to become a teacher. Is that because you have a love for the course that you're wanting to go into, for teaching because you used to do tuition in schools, or what is it that kind of got you into teaching? Even if you've not done anything, you still have to kind of relate it to some form of passion that you are fulfilling, because it's not easy to be a teacher. I feel like I'm going to say that loads, but it's a really fun job. And if you enjoy every day being different, if you enjoy being challenged, if you enjoy having students or someone that can look up to you and you can kind of guide them, I feel like teaching is an amazing career for that. Another question I was asked is why my subject in particular. Once you choose what subject you're doing, it's quite easy for you to kind of justify that, because I'm pretty sure you've done that in A level or you've done that in university. So for me, it was the fact that I've always loved design. I've always loved art. I did it for GCSEs for A levels, did design in university, and then I also went into that field. So it made sense that I was going to follow that direction and teach something that I love and I feel confident in teaching. So whether that's maths, English, history, geography, PE, you need to make sure that there's something that shows that you've got a passion for it and that you've got a love for this subject, and especially that your subject knowledge is up to standard. What or who inspired me to teach? Within my application process, I mentioned how my relatives, some of my aunties were teachers, and that really inspired me, but it wasn't something I grew up thinking that I was going to do, but I kind of just fell into it. I think it's really important for you to kind of have bullet points in your head or even write them down, because it can be hard to talk about yourself, talk about like your background, your story. So it's nice to have things that will like kind of guide you through. I just spoke about how I had such good teachers in my school that inspired me, that made me feel safe and creative when I wanted, and I would love to do that for other students. I was also asked, what is my teaching philosophy? So this question I feel like will come up, and it's a pretty standard question. They just want you to know, like, how do you see yourself as a teacher when you're in a classroom? What will be your teaching philosophy to those students in that environment, and what does that look like? Even if you've never been in a classroom before, which they don't expect you to be, but just envision, if that's, I want my classroom to always be silent. I want everyone to make sure that they're getting on with their tasks, only hands up when they're asked to. If you want your class to be a safe space for people, I said that I was making sure that I'm creating a safe environment for the students, making sure they can be as creative as they want, having the autonomy to be themselves, being able to express themselves and not feel judged. That was really important to me. And I feel like your teaching philosophy is something very unique to you, so you need to be as specific and personal as you can. I know there's loads out there that you can follow, but I think it's nice when you show off your personality through your interviews, and they want someone different. They want all their teachers to have their own personalities and way of teaching, and I think it's really important to highlight that. Another really important topic, or like kind of umbrella I'm going to go to, is safeguarding. This is something that will, I think, 100% come up. They asked me, what does safeguarding mean to me? I did some research. I think it would be best if you find out what that term means. It basically means keeping the children safe, keeping yourself safe in the school environment, making sure that they're away from any physical, mental abuse, any form of harm, because you as a teacher have the responsibility for these children. So another question was, what would I do if a student disclosed something to me? I basically did some research and also watched YouTube videos on basically every school has their own department for safeguarding. There's always a safeguarding lead. So I would make sure I know who my safeguarding lead is. I would know all the staff and their responsibilities, so that if a student did come to me and disclose something, I would be able to ask them to tell me what was wrong. Never give any leading questions, but always allow them to give me the information that they're willing to share. And the most important thing is to tell them that I will have to pass this information on to the safeguarding lead or to someone higher up, because once you've done that, you've kind of done your bit, and then it's the safeguarding lead and their job to sort out. But you need to make sure that it's something that you tell them, that I can't keep this a secret, this will have to go to safeguarding. Make sure that you create that comfortable environment so that they are safe. I was also asked how I can protect myself as a teacher. I wasn't prepared for this, but I think I got lucky in saying kind of making sure that I'm never alone in a room with a student, making sure the door's always open, making sure that if there's any inappropriate talk going on, I'm not getting involved in that, and I'm making sure that I'm shutting that down as soon as possible, because there's so many things that can happen in a school, especially with so many students. You just need to make sure that you are keeping yourself safe as well. So the other kind of subjects were classroom management based. The first one was, what's more important, subject knowledge or behavior management? I said that behavior management was the most important, because I believe that if you can't manage your classroom and manage the kids within your classroom, it will just be harder for you to actually teach the content that you want to teach. Once you've got your behavior management down, everything else is a lot easier. So that was my answer. I think that was the correct way to kind of move through that, because you can have as much subject knowledge as you want, but if you're not able to control your class, or able to control the few kids that are always disengaged or causing havoc, you need to kind of have those behavior management strategies down so that you have a nice, calm working environment. What to do if a student is disengaged? You're always going to have students that are disengaged because of your topic, maybe, especially art. I feel like that could be any subject. You're always going to have disengaged students, but what can you do to kind of change that? I would say getting to know that student on a much deeper level, having conversations with them one-to-one, even if it's a small thing like getting to know who their favorite football team is, what favorite show they're watching, what kind of food they like. I feel like once students know that you are interested in their lives, they are just automatically kind of more inclined to give you more. And just be invested. It's nice to be involved in their likes and dislikes and their life in general, so that you know how to kind of pull when they're feeling disengaged. Another one was how to manage low-level disruptions. So low-level disruptions, I feel like, will be constantly happening in your classroom, especially when you first start out. It's always important to get your expectations down from the first lesson. Before they even walk into the classroom, make sure you've got a solid entry routine, making sure they're all stood in a straight line, single file line, shirts are tucked in, uniforms are looking all clean before they come in, so they know that you've got an expectation. And in the first lesson, I feel like you always need to kind of go in a bit hard, and then you can kind of go softer as you go along, because if you are not setting those boundaries and expectations, the kids just won't know what to expect from you. So to have those expectations kind of shoots down the low-level disruptions, because the kids know you're not going to have any of that in the classroom. I was asked to bring a starter activity that related to my subject. This was just a 5-minute starter activity, and I'd recommend you keep it very short. Make sure that is not something that's going to take the children too long to complete. It's something that they walk into the door and they have a sheet of paper in front of them, or you've got a question up on the board, and make sure that that's something that relates to your subject or your overall lesson. So for example, mine was an object on each table, and each kid just had to observe and do an observational drawing of that object. I didn't want them to focus on too much detail. I just wanted to focus on proportion, because the rest of the lesson was going to be doing a still life. So you want the star activity to be something that leads into your lesson. So if that's geography, if you're looking at tectonic plates or population, make sure that your star activity is something that introduces that topic in a simple way, and then that way you know, all right, this is where all my students are at, this is the level that they're at, this is what they don't know, this is what they don't know, and it's just something that is easy for them to digest. I was also asked what I would think that I would find stressful through my PGCE and QTS year. I told them that I think actually just going into a classroom, because even though I taught previously in South Korea, I'd never taught in a British school, and I know it's a completely different world. So my main concern was, how am I going to actually do the behavior management? How am I going to create my own resources, my lesson plans? But I was just very honest with them. I feel like you need to be as honest as you can, because they are there to train you and to show you how to kind of find your path as a teacher. They don't want you to be a fully formed teacher. They don't expect that. So as long as you're being honest and being yourself, I think it's great. They also asked how I handle feedback. I told them I'm actually, as an artist or designer, I feel like I get loads of criticism, constructive criticisms from clients or people if I'm ever posting my work, and I think it's something that is quite natural to me now. I'm always taking it as something positive, because throughout your year you're going to be observed loads of times, you're going to be given loads of feedback, and you want to be as positive as you can. Even if it's not a particularly positive comment that is being made, you want to make sure that you can not take that personally and you can actually action that. So some last final minute tips that I wrote down. I feel like you need to be honest, be very passionate, make sure that you don't sound like you're just reading off a script, but be yourself, show off your personality, tell them what you like, what you dislike, because they want to see that. Make sure that you read up on safeguarding within schools, maybe a bit about teaching standards, but you don't need to really get into that too much. Really think about and write down bullet points of what kind of teacher you want to be, because if you've never taught before or you've never been in a classroom before, that can be quite a hard question. But write down, what can you envision yourself or your classrooms to look like. Make sure that you've kind of brushed up on your subject knowledge. If that is in history, geography, make sure you know kind of how the curriculum is laid out, just in case they ask you any questions regarding that. And also have a few stories, or have a bit about your background, like I was mentioning before, where you can tell them like, oh yeah, this question relates to a story or an experience I had at work. It's just nice for them to feel like you're being your genuine self. If you've already applied, you've got a space for your PGCE, or you're thinking of applying for a PGCE and QTS, please write down any comments or questions you've got below. I would love to create a space where I can show my journey as a teacher, but also help other people. I've personally had such an incredibly challenging but enjoyable year, and I would love to talk more about it and share my experience more in a positive way. So I remember when I was researching and seeing the course or just the education structure, there was just a lot of negativity out there, and I think it's nice to have some form of positive representation. Even though yes, it is hard and a lot of teachers go through loads of stress, there is still an incredibly rewarding side of teaching, and I would love to highlight that and show off my journey. So if you would want to see more videos, just write that below. I will be talking more about my placements and more about my experience and what's next. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and if you've got any questions, just let me know.